Your money goals are not too low because you lack ambition. They are too low because you do not understand gravity. That is the first thing I would tell you if you sat across from me and asked why you still feel financially nervous, even after working hard, making decent money, and doing what the world told you was responsible. Most people do not build wealth. Most people spend their lives trying to keep from falling. They call it budgeting, they call it saving, they call it being practical. But when I look closely, what I usually see is a person trying to outrun a force. They have never named inflation as gravity. Lifestyle inflation is gravity. Status spending is gravity. Weak skills are gravity. A paycheck that rises slower than your expectations is gravity. A life built on fixed costs is gravity. And if your plan does not produce escape velocity, then you are not climbing. You are just falling more slowly. That is why so many people set $1 million goal and feel intelligent for having done it. A round number sounds serious. A retirement calculator makes it sound official. A monthly contribution makes it feel disciplined. Then time passes, prices rise, standards move, the dollar weakens, and the number that once sounded like freedom becomes a small patch of air inside a collapsing cabin. You were not stupid. You were just measuring your future with today's ruler. That mistake ruins more lives than bad luck. A small target is dangerous, not because it is small. It is dangerous because it tricks you into thinking you are safe. I have spent my life watching how money behaves under pressure. I have watched individuals do it. I have watched companies do it. I have watched governments do it. And the pattern is always the same. People confuse nominal progress with real progress. They see the paycheck. They do not see the drag. They see the account balance. They do not see the purchasing power leaking out of it. They see the raise. They do not see that their expenses learned about the raise before their net worth did. They celebrate a bigger number while living inside a weaker system. That is not wealth. That is altitude illusion. You feel high because the number is higher. But if the engine is weak and gravity is stronger, the plane is still going down. If you want to understand why ordinary financial advice leaves so many people disappointed, start there. The average person is taught to think like a saver trapped inside a worker's life. Save a little, invest a little. Wait a long time. Hope the market is kind, hope inflation behaves, hope you stay employed, hope you do not panic, hope your body holds up, hope the rules do not change. That is not a strategy. That is a prayer disguised as discipline. I like discipline. I built everything on discipline, but discipline without math is just respectable suffering. And respectable suffering is one of the most expensive lifestyles in America. You can live carefully for decades and still arrive at old age with less freedom than you expected because your plan never had enough thrust to break the pull of time, prices, and ordinary human weakness. That is why I want you to stop worshiping the word realistic. Realistic is one of the dirtiest words in personal finance when it is used by frightened people. A realistic goal in most households is simply a goal that does not require identity change. It does not require more skill. It does not require social discomfort. It does not require saying no. It does not require new standards. It does not require becoming the kind of person who can generate more value. It just requires patience. And patience is beautiful when it is attached to a powerful machine. Patience is deadly when it is attached to a weak one. If you sit on a runway with a weak engine for 50 years, that is not wisdom. That is delay. I want you to think in a harsher way. I want you to stop asking, what number sounds big? I want you to ask, what number has enough escape velocity to preserve my choices after decades of inflation, taxation, mistakes, interruptions, and reality? That is a very different question because once you ask it honestly, you realize that most retirement fantasies are built on toy numbers. People say they want $1 million. What they really mean is they want relief. They want quiet. They want to stop waking up to instructions. They want the right to refuse stupid people. They want to say no to humiliating work. They want time with their children. They want to stop living one broken transmission away from panic. That is not $1 million dream. That is a freedom dream. And freedom dreams have to be priced correctly. If you price them cheaply, they turn into regret. One of the ugliest forms of financial ignorance is what I call nominal comfort. That is when you stare at future dollars and imagine current purchasing power. It is one of the easiest lies to tell yourself because nobody has to force it on you. Your own mind does the work. You imagine that some future balance will feel large because it feels large now. You imagine that future passive income will buy what current passive income buys now. You imagine that the life you see in your head will still be available at the same price when you finally arrive. And because the picture in your mind is emotionally vivid, you trust it. That is the trap. Emotionally vivid does not mean economically true. I would rather offend you with math today than watch life offend you with reality later. So let me put it plainly. If your target does not account for inflation, it is not a target. It is a sentimental number, and sentimental numbers get crushed by real economies. This is why I have no interest in telling young people that their small habits are too small to matter. That is nonsense. When you are young, your money is not weak. It is radioactive, it has time attached to it, and time is the amplifier the old can never buy back. A young person earning a modest amount but directing it intelligently can create far more future freedom than an older high earner who spends with ego and starts late. The market does not care about your excuses. Time rewards early seriousness with a brutality that almost feels unfair. That is why youth is wasted on flexing. Young people buy symbols because they do not yet respect force. They lease the car, they buy the belt, they chase the dinner, they spend for the photograph, and because the price tag looks manageable in the present tense, they never translate it into lost escape velocity. That is the missing habit. You must learn to convert present spending into future drag. Every unnecessary recurring payment is not just an expense. It is a gravity generator. A car payment is not a transportation decision. It is a long burn attached to a depreciating asset. A status purchase is not a treat. It is a tax on future autonomy. A lease is not flexibility. It is rented identity with compound drag. A luxury habit started too early is not self-expression. It is fuel thrown out of the cabin before takeoff. Translate it brutally. A $500 status purchase is not $500. It is present comfort purchased with future lift. A $500 monthly car payment is not just a line item. It is a recurring drag device strapped to your financial wings. 3 years of that payment is not a harmless phase. It is a chunk of future autonomy burned to keep up an image in the present. When you see spending that way, you stop asking whether something is affordable. You ask whether it is sabotaging takeoff. That is how I want you to see spending. Not morally, mechanically. Good financial lives are rarely built by shame. They are built by correct force. When I was young, I understood something many people still resist. A dollar in your hand is not just spending power. It is engine fuel. If you put it into a weak life, it disappears. If you put it into a productive machine, it multiplies. So the first serious shift you have to make is this. Stop measuring money by what it can buy this month. Start measuring money by what it can launch over a decade. That one shift changes everything. Now, a side job is not annoying extra work. It is additional thrust. Now, a wasted weekend is not just leisure. It might be lost altitude. Now, a foolish purchase is not harmless. It is delayed freedom. Now, saving is not deprivation, it is retained fuel. And retained fuel matters because the average person has a savings problem only on the surface. Underneath, they have an income architecture problem. There is only so much optimization you can do on a weak income. You can cut waste. You should cut waste. You can simplify. You should simplify. But eventually you hit a wall. You cannot budget your way to strategic freedom forever. At some point, the engine itself has to get stronger. That is why I do not want you to become obsessed with thrift while remaining passive about earnings. A person who spends carefully but never upgrades income power is still living under a ceiling. A person who increases income capacity while controlling lifestyle creep is building thrust. Those are not the same game. One is survival with manners. The other is capital formation. I care about capital formation. That is how owners think. Workers usually think about how to preserve what comes in. Owners think about how to expand what can come in. Workers focus on the paycheck. Owners focus on the engine. Workers ask how to cut. Owners ask what machine can produce more. If you want a different life, you need more owner logic in your head. Even if you are still an employee today, because the true bottleneck in most lives is not effort. It is weak commercial capability. A person says they need to save more. Maybe, but very often what they really need is to become worth more in the marketplace. That is a harder truth because it does not flatter your current identity. It asks you to admit that your earning power may be underdeveloped. It asks you to stop romanticizing loyalty to low-value skills. It asks you to build usefulness. And usefulness is what the market pays for. If I were starting again with no great assets, I would still anchor on the same principle. Live, lean enough to keep pressure low, but put real force behind increasing what you can earn. Not theoretically, commercially. I am not interested in vague self-improvement. I am interested in skills that someone will pay for. Sales, marketing, copyright operations, negotiation, deal making, distribution, anything that can move cash, move customers, move trust, or move decisions. Those skills are not motivational ornaments. They are boosters. And if you acquire them early, you do not just make more money, you make more investable money. That distinction matters. A raise that gets absorbed by a larger life is vanity. A raise that expands investable surplus is thrust. I want thrust. I want distance between your needs and your income. I want room. I want refusal power. I want you to be able to look at a bad opportunity and say no without your nervous system catching fire. That does not come from cute budgeting slogans. It comes from a machine that produces more than your current life consumes. Now we arrive at the part most people resist because it threatens their ego. The best early investment is often not the market. It is your ability to become more valuable faster. That statement bothers people because they want a clean answer. They want a ticker. They want a ratio. They want a portfolio percentage. What they do not want is the humbling truth that learning a better commercial skill may outperform their early investing for years, because the real multiplier is not the market return. It is the increase in future investable cash flow that is the engine behind the engine. If you spend money to learn a skill that permanently raises your income, the return is not a one-time gain. It is a pipeline gain. It pays again and again and again. That is why I have always respected spending that buys speed, judgment, and capability more than spending that buys image. Image decays, capability compounds. The market remembers capability. Your friends remember the watch for about 11 seconds. If you are serious, you must start treating skill acquisition as capital allocation. That means you do not ask, is this expensive? You ask, can this create future earning power, compress time, reduce ignorance, or improve decision quality enough to change my trajectory? Those are better questions, because the cheap person and the rational allocator are not the same person. A cheap person protects cash. A rational allocator deploys cash towards superior future outcomes. Those two people can look identical in the short run. In the long run, one stays stuck and one pulls away. Now let me make this more uncomfortable. Most people are terrified of spending money on skills, not because the math is unclear, but because failure would expose them. If you buy education and do nothing, you cannot blame the system as easily. If you pay for guidance and still avoid action, the mirror gets mean. If you ask for feedback, somebody may reveal that your sales ability is weak, your communication is muddy, your assumptions are lazy, your discipline is fake, or your understanding is incomplete. People say they want success. Very often they want emotional safety more. And emotional safety is gravity. It keeps you close to the ground. It tells you to protect your pride. It tells you to avoid rooms where your ignorance becomes visible. It tells you to keep your money, keep your habits, keep your explanations, and keep your slow timeline. Then it calls that prudence. I call it controlled decline. Because without better skills, better networks, better feedback loops, or better judgment, your financial future does not stay still. It decays relative to the world around it. You need motion, you need lift, you need to become stronger than the drag. That is why I always admire people who can tolerate temporary embarrassment in service of permanent capability. They learn faster, they ask better questions, they put themselves in rooms where they are not the most advanced. They trade comfort for compression. That is a powerful trade. 1 hour with the right person can save you a year of bad experimentation. One correct piece of feedback can remove months of friction. One better framework can stop years of small, stupid losses. I do not say that to romanticize courses, coaches, or expensive rooms. There is plenty of nonsense in the world, plenty of incompetent teachers, plenty of people who sell confidence instead of competence. I also like the discipline of a learning budget, not a vague intention, a real percentage. A fixed amount of income that must be deployed into skill, feedback, room access, or intelligent experimentation. Why? Because if you do not deliberately allocate capital toward acceleration, comfort will quietly absorb it. A learning budget forces you to keep converting current cash into future capability. It reminds you that one good experiment can scale an income engine faster than years of cautious drifting. It also trains a deeper identity. You stop thinking like someone trying to protect every dollar. You start thinking like someone responsible for turning dollars into force. You must use judgment. You must look for proof. You must study incentives. You must ask whether the advice is specific, commercial, and field tested, but do not swing from healthy skepticism into paralysis. That is another gravity trick. If you wait for certainty before spending on growth, you will stay small for a very long time. Uncertainty is the admission price for acceleration. That is as true in markets as it is in careers. I also want to push against another popular delusion. Many people think financial success is mostly about information. It is not. Information is everywhere. Instruction is everywhere. Free material is everywhere. The shortage is not content. The shortage is applied repetition with quality feedback. That is why some people watch 100 hours and change nothing. And somebody else takes one skill, practices it under pressure, gets corrected repeatedly, and sees their income change in a year. The second person is not more inspired. They are in a stronger loop. Effort without feedback is wandering. Feedback without effort is theater. You need both. The world pays brutally well for people who can compress learning loops. And that brings me to another truth most people hate. You must become a collector of useful force. Not random knowledge, not intellectual jewelry. Useful force. You learn sales so you can convert attention into revenue. You learn marketing so you can create demand. You learn communication so you can move people. You learn operations so what you build does not collapse under growth. You learn finance so money stops behaving like a mystery around you. You learn negotiation so value does not leak out of every important conversation. Each skill is another stage on the rocket. Each one reduces drag or increases thrust. And once enough of them stack together, your life stops feeling fragile. That is when people looking from the outside call you lucky. Luck is one of the names the public gives to hidden escape velocity. They do not see the years when you lived below your ego. They do not see the nights you used free material to build the base. They do not see the money you redirected from appearances into capability. They do not see the conversations where you gave value first to gain access, insight, or compression. They only see altitude. They do not see propulsion. I have always found that amuse because the same world that laughs at frugality when you are unknown will applaud discipline when it turns into visible results. That is why you must be careful whose approval you are buying. The crowd loves image. The crowd rarely rewards invisible preparation, but invisible preparation is where escape velocity comes from. When I think about the people who actually change their lives, they usually do a few things that sound simple but are emotionally rare. They set a floor and defend it. They know what their life actually costs. They do not let lifestyle float upward every time income rises. They invest first rather than hoping there is something left later. They increase the amount over time instead of freezing the contribution forever and pretending inflation will be kind. They build learning budgets. They deploy money into skill, proximity, and experimentation. They understand that the goal is not just to own assets. The goal is to become an asset. That last point is the hinge. If you see yourself merely as a spender, then every dollar feels scarce. If you see yourself as an asset under development, then money directed into useful growth is not always a loss. Sometimes it is construction, sometimes it is fuel, sometimes it is the only way out. And when you get into better rooms, do not arrive as a tourist. arrive as a contributor. Poor people are often strangely stingy with time. Even when time is the one asset they still control. That is backwards. If you do not yet have money, bring effort, bring usefulness, bring review, bring labor, bring thoughtful questions, bring help. 6 hours of your effort given intelligently can earn 1 hour of someone else's hard-won judgment, and that 1 hour may collapse a year of wandering. That is a trade any rational person should be willing to make. You have to learn the difference between consumption that lowers drag and consumption that creates drag. A used car that protects your time and keeps your costs sane can lower drag. A fancy car bought to impress fragile people creates drag. A modest apartment shared during a building phase can lower drag. A luxury apartment purchased to prove adulthood creates drag. A course that helps you sell better may lower drag by increasing future earnings. A luxury vacation purchased during a weak financial foundation creates drag. The question is never simply, can I afford it? The question is, does this increase escape velocity or reduce it? That is the operating question. If you learn to ask it often enough, your life starts separating itself from the average. Now let me say something that sounds severe but is actually kind. Most people's goals are too small because they are trying to build a comfortable future without becoming an uncomfortable person in the present. That bargain does not work. You do not reach unusual freedom through ordinary emotional habits. You have to become harder to impress, harder to distract, harder to shame, and harder to seduce with status. You have to become strategically boring in areas that ruin other people. You have to learn to tolerate the social friction of not performing wealth while you are still building it. That is one of the hardest skills in modern life. Everyone wants to look upgraded before they are structurally secure. That one weakness destroys decades. The person who spends to look free becomes owned. The person who accepts looking ordinary while building force becomes dangerous. I prefer dangerous. Dangerous to mediocrity, dangerous to dependency, dangerous to the people and systems that profit from your insecurity. That is what real wealth does. It does not just buy things. It buys non-compliance. It buys time. It buys calm. It buys the ability to think in years while others panic in weeks. It buys the right to walk away. That is why the true target is not a number on a dashboard. It is refusal power. And refusal power requires more capital, more skill, and more discipline than most people admit. You cannot get there on tiny plans tied to nominal dreams. You need bigger targets. You need a tougher relationship with spending. You need a stronger commitment to earning. You need a more rational approach to learning. You need enough self-respect to stop converting your future into theater for the present. That is the shift. And once you feel it, the world changes shape. The extra $1,000 does not look small anymore. The recurring expense does not look harmless anymore. The skill course does not look expensive in the same way anymore. The room full of people ahead of you does not look intimidating in the same way anymore. Everything starts translating into force. You begin to understand that money is not just money. Money is compressed time. Skill is compressed time. Feedback is compressed time. Proximity is compressed time. And people who understand compressed time are almost impossible to catch once they get moving. That is why I would tell you to think bigger, but not in the childish sense. Not bigger cars, not bigger houses too early, not bigger consumption, bigger force, bigger targets, bigger distance between income and lifestyle, bigger commitment to usefulness, bigger tolerance for uncertainty, bigger seriousness about the real price of freedom. If you do that, compounding becomes your partner instead of a slogan you repeat while treading water. If you do not, then compounding still works. It just works against you. Compounding can build a fortune. It can also compound weak choices, recurring expenses, delayed starts, mediocre skills, and timid goals until they harden into a life you do not want. That is the cruelty of the system. It does not just reward good decisions, it amplifies repeated ones. So you need to decide what exactly you are repeating. That is the final test, not whether you understand this. Not whether you agree with me, not whether you can quote the logic. The test is simpler and harsher. Are you building escape velocity or are you decorating gravity? Because those are the only two games most people are really playing. One game feels better now and costs you later. The other costs you now and frees you later. One game buys applause. The other buys control. One game makes you look successful. The other makes you difficult to own. You do not need another inspirational sentence. You need a decision. You need to choose whether your money will continue serving your impulses, your image, and your excuses, or whether it will start serving thrust. Because the runway is not endless. Time is moving whether you respect it or not. Prices are moving whether you plan for them or not. Gravity is working whether you name it or not. And if you wait too long to build the engine, one day you will discover that what looked like a safe life was just a slow descent in clean clothes. I would not accept that life for myself. I would not recommend it for you, so choose, build the engine, increase the thrust, protect the fuel, buy the skill, raise the target, or keep calling a weak plan realistic until gravity proves otherwise.